Dr. Yadira Tejeda-Saldana from New Harvest. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the invite. I'm really excited to be here with both of you.
We're so excited to be here with you. Yadira, we really admire what you do. Can you tell us a little bit about New Harvest?
Well, New Harvest was the first nonprofit organization that started supporting cellular agriculture. Our mission is to advance cellular agriculture and also maximize a positive impact. So really thinking about a food system that is just, equitable, and sustainable. And we do this by conducting and supporting original and open research. And we also support a lot of collaborative initiatives and multi-stakeholder engagement.
Yeah, and as one of the collaborators for many years with you, it's been a real pleasure and a joy to work with you. You're at the pioneering edge of this emerging new field, so you're a really good person to ask the question, why should Canadians care? What benefit does cellular agriculture offer to Canada?
That's a pretty good question, and I would say that cellular agriculture can bring a lot of benefits to Canada. Let's just think about the crops that we produce here. Canada is one of the biggest crop producers in the world, but what do we do with them? We send them to other countries to be processed, and then we buy again the added value products instead of actually processing them here and producing those added value products that can bring more benefits to Canadian economy.
Yeah, the way I look at it is that sort of the ways that we've used to grow food over the last 50 or 60 years involving long distance trade and things like that, they're not working as well as they should have been. And the three C's of COVID and conflicts like in the Ukraine and of course climate change mean that food is more expensive. Climate change isn't only changing our growing seasons, but is also changing where crops produce. And agriculture and food systems globally are responsible for about a third of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. So for me, we need new ways of doing things, and one of the key strategies of that is cellular agriculture. And maybe cellular agriculture can help us bring our greenhouse gas emissions down while addressing food security.
Well, and that's so critical. We know that we need to get the food system to a net zero state where it's not making the problems worse. Yadira, what do you see in the way of mitigation that you think cellular food can bring to climate?
Yeah, well, one of the biggest benefits of cellular agriculture is actually helping us mitigate climate change. We can actually produce food with less greenhouse gas emissions, and we can also produce the food locally. So we will be really independent of the climate change. It can also help us, for example, reduce the amount of land, the amount of water, and also the amount of eutrophic issues that we can have with current agricultural systems.
Yeah, so from like disease to war to unprecedented weather patterns, I really think there's cracks opening up in the global food system, and maybe you can help us reflect a little bit from your work with New Harvest on how maybe Cell Ag can address national and global food systems and food resilience security needs.
Yeah, that's a pretty important question. And let's think about COVID. So during the COVID pandemic, Canada wasn't really prepared for it. We needed to actually depend on PPE and vaccines that were produced in other countries and then buy them to actually respond to this crisis that we were facing. So cellular agriculture can actually help us have local production of food if we have the right infrastructure, if we have the right supporting systems to actually do it. We can create a system that is not going to be dependent on climate, and we can actually fight food insecurity here in Canada. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for Canada to be a leader in this new and emerging food technology.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also think it's important to note that Canada, for instance, as a country, is not only protein self-sufficient right now, we also export a lot of protein. We also know that the world needs more protein, and we need to do that in a way that doesn't contribute to climate change. So this is not an either-or proposition, it's a yes and we need all these things. And Lenore, you sometimes talk about the need for a portfolio of protein sources. What do you think about all that?
Yes, and we tend to think about protein as coming from animal products, and of course it does. But we have a portfolio of tools for producing proteins for the food system. So we have plant-based proteins, which of course are one of Canada's big exports and one of our strengths. And we have animal-based proteins, but we know we need to do them a little differently. We should be looking at regenerative agriculture, at more grazing. So how do we make up the difference? Maybe cellular agriculture is a big piece of that. It's a new tool in our portfolio to make sure that we have enough protein for the entire planet.
Yeah, and not to mention that it is actually a massive opportunity for a Canadian economy.
Well, and it's no secret that cellular agriculture is either going to happen in Canada or to Canada. So what does the industry need for Canada to be a real leader in this field?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that we need to think about to build the right infrastructure for cellular agriculture to happen in Canada. Let's think about the talent. Let's think about the facilities where actually entrepreneurs can do their experiments, scaling of facilities. So there's a lot of things that we need to think, and we need to start developing them right now so that we are prepared for the future challenges that we're going to be facing.
Maybe self-food can even help with the price of coffee, because it's pretty steep these days.
But that's sort of the point. Like, it's an illustration. This is the third year in a row that demand for coffee has outpaced supply. Globally, our supply of coffee is actually supposed to be 3.8 million bags short this year, and that, thanks to climate change, isn't going to get any better.
Yeah, and let's not think only about coffee. We can produce also vanilla or chocolate with cellular agriculture.
Well, that's a cup half full, really, and we're uniquely positioned to provide that solution, and I'd argue Canada has a secret ingredient that most countries don't.
Yeah, I think we have to remember as a country that we have a lot of natural advantages in this space. We've got everything that we can imagine. We've got that supply of talent you just talked about. We've got gutsy entrepreneurs. We've got a stable market, a good regulatory environment. And critically, we've got biomass, the stuff, the plant material that needs to go into the bioreactors to let these cells, whether it comes from tissue culturing or fermentation, let these cells grow. What do you think, Yadira?
Well, we have a lot of byproducts that come up from the processing of proteins, for example, and starches. Let's think about starches. They can actually produce or help us manufacture the sugars that we need to feed the bacteria or to feed the cells that are going to grow in the bioreactors.
Well, and maybe these starches actually give us the potential to compete on price with other places in the world because we've got the feedstock.
Yeah, let's just take a step back though. Let's realize that this is building on one of the great Canadian farming success stories. And our farms on the prairies produce some of the most efficient, highest quality plant protein anywhere in the world. Now, some of that is lentils. Export most of those lentils to places like India. But I think a crop like a pea, that's actually a product that's used as an ingredient by food manufacturers. And what happens is that pea's taken and you fractionate out the protein. And that leaves that high quality starch that you're talking about there. And really, I think it's possible to imagine that this byproduct, this starch product that doesn't have a tremendous amount of economic value right now, could be used in a sort of a way of channeling the circular economy by entrepreneurs, funded by New Harvest, that would ferment that starch into higher value products. What do you think here, Lenore?
Oh yeah, and I mean the sheer volume of starch we produce, I could imagine us exporting the starch and countries like Singapore fueling their bioreactors to make chicken nuggets using Canadian starch, and that's a real win for our economy. I just realized we've been using the term bioreactor a lot. Maybe we need to take a minute and talk about what they are and what they do.